Good evening from the Ozark foothills of Northeast Arkansas. I'm Carl Richardson, and this is Midnight Frequency Radio. Our guest this evening is Kathleen Marden. Miss Marden's insatiable interest in UFOs and ET contact began in 1961 when her aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill, had a close encounter and UFO abduction in New Hampshire White Mountains. She was 13 years old at the time. As a family member, Kathleen gained first-hand knowledge of Betty and Barney's UFO encounters on the day they arrived home and 2 days later. She visited the Hills' home and examined the physical evidence. She has devoted years to the painstaking investigation of the Hills' anomalous events and archival research in their UFO abduction. As the trustee of Betty's estate, she selected the files from Betty's collection that are now housed in a permanent archive at the Milne Special Collections Library, UNH Library, University of New Hampshire, Durham, New Hampshire. She was instrumental in the development of the State of New Hemisphere historical marker to commemorate the Hills' UFO experience. Kathleen is the author and co-author of several books. Her bestseller with scientific UFOologist and lecturer Stanton T. Friedman is captured The Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. They co-authored two additional books, Science Was Wrong, published in Chinese, and Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. Her book with Denise Stoner, The Alien Abduction File, includes her investigation of 6 intergenerational cases of ET contact. Her fifth book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted, is a comprehensive guide on UFO abduction phenomenon and a self-help book for UFO abductees. In 2021, she updated and authored new sections in the 60th anniversary edition of Captured, The Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. She has authored 2 additional of Forbidden Knowledge, a personal journey from alien abduction to spiritual transformation. As a scholar researcher, she has conducted extensive research in physical online archives. She has appeared as an on-camera expert on dozens of television and video productions, in innumerable radio shows and podcasts. Additionally, she has presented at conferences across the United States in several foreign countries. Good evening, Mrs. Marden, and welcome to Midnight Frequency Radio. Could you give us a background on Betty and Barney Hill's experience when it took place?
Certainly, I'd be delighted. I was 13 when it happened, and Betty and Barney had a close encounter with an unconventional craft in the White Mountains of New Hampshire when they were returning home from a vacation trip. And it had occurred the previous evening, starting on September 19 and into the early morning hours of September 20th. When they arrived home, they carried their memories of a close encounter with a silent, hovering, unconventional craft. The craft had swooped down after they had watched it for a period of about a half hour to an hour at fairly close range through Franconia Notch, which is a beautiful scenic area in New Hampshire. And now they were south of the Notch when this craft swooped down, and Barney had to stop the car in the middle of the road so that he wouldn't be directly under the craft. He stepped out with his binoculars. He looked up at this silent, hovering, disc-shaped craft. It was no longer spinning or rotating as it appeared to be doing earlier. And as he looked up, he could see a row of windows with kind of a bright bluish-white light behind those windows. He was very perplexed because he did not believe that this was true. He was a confirmed skeptic. And so he looked at it. He stepped away from the car, leaving his door open so that it was internally lighted. The craft was now hovering about 200 feet above him. And when he stepped back, the craft crossed over the road into an adjacent field, and it descended to within about 100 feet of Barney. He lifted the binoculars to his eyes when he reached that field, and still shaking his head and saying, "This can't be real," but it was. He looked up and he observed figures that were dressed in black, shiny uniforms looking down at him. They, according to Walter Webb's report, were, quote, "somehow not human," close quote. And Walter Webb was the first investigator from the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. On September 21st, they made a report to Pease Air Force Base. And they made this report because my father's best friend had advised Betty that at Pease Air Force Base had asked the police departments, and this was a police officer, to advise people to report any UFO sightings to them. So Betty and Barney, being the good citizens that they were, made this report the following day. But let's get back to what Barney was observing, because this is all part of his conscious recall. One remained at the window. The others walked to what appeared to be some kind of a panel. Their arms went up. He could now see them from the tops of their heads and their arms to their knees. He told the officer at Pease Air Force Base that they were about the size of a pencil held at arm's length. When the craft swooped down, it was the size of not a full moon. It was the size of a dinner plate held at arm's length. Keep in mind that the full moon is the size of an aspirin held at arm's length. So this was huge. It wasn't a distant star. And all of the evidence, the historical documents, contain that information. So Barney's looking up at these entities on the craft, and something starts to happen. Little red lights start to slide out from the craft, just two of them, on fin-like structures. And then something starts to drop down from the bottom of the craft, and Barney immediately senses that he is about to be captured. He pulls the binoculars away from his eyes so forcefully that he breaks the leather strap. He runs back to the car, screaming to Betty that they have to get out of there or they're going to be captured. He throws the binoculars onto the seat of the car, gets in, and starts speeding down the highway because as he was returning to the car, he looked back and saw that that craft was now moving in his direction. He told Benny to roll down the window. She did. She looked up, and all she could see was blackness. Even though it was a bright, starlit night, the moon was about 3/4 full, and she was looking for lights. She didn't see lights. She later realized that the craft was right over their vehicle, because within moments, she and Barney heard a series of 5 to 7 code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of their vehicle. And when they heard this sound, they could feel a vibration in their cars, kind of an electrical sensation. And when this occurred, they began to lose conscious awareness, this moment by moment awareness that we have when we are driving. The next thing they knew, and as if only a moment had passed, they were 35 miles down the highway. They heard a second series of code-like buzzing sounds, which returned them to full consciousness. Betty said to Barney, "Now do you believe in flying saucers?" And Barney said, "Don't be ridiculous. I can make that sound." That sounds like a dropped tuning fork. And so he stopped the car. He drove it from one side of the road to the other, and he could not reproduce that sound. Betty, more than Barney, recalled somehow finding themselves on a dirt road lined with tall trees, of a roadblock, of a fiery orb. They reported this in their first reports, but they didn't know where or when it occurred. So this was all very confusing to them. They drove home, arriving a couple of hours later than they had anticipated. When Betty checked her watch when they arrived home, she realized that it wasn't running, even though she wound it and Barney wound his when they were in Colebrook, New Hampshire, at about 5 minutes after 10. And it should have continued running because now it was 5:16, and I know that 5:16 a.m. I know that because I have Betty's watch. I'm the trustee of her estate. I set up her archival collection at the University of New Hampshire. And that watch reads 5:16 because she walked into the house and set it, not realizing that it was permanently broken. It never ran again, and it still reads 5:16. So she went to take off her dress, and she noticed that it was torn in several places, mysteriously torn. The hem was torn down on one side. The lining was torn from waist to hemline. The zipper that ran along the back of the dress was torn in the stitching along the zipper, and also the thick zipper fabric. This was all a great mystery, but it was very unsettling to arrive home after having this close encounter, and especially for Barney, who actually did observe entities on board the craft that he told Walter Webb that were somehow not human. This was very distressing. Betty was curious. Barney told Betty not to mention it to anyone because no good could come of it. Betty said, "You're not going to tell me what to do." And she walked to the phone and she called my mother. She had several calls with my mother, but I was, as a 13-year-old, arriving home from school in the afternoon, overheard their conversation. There had been no family interest as far as I knew. I'd never heard anyone in the family talking about UFOs. But for the first time, I heard about this experience from my mother, who was relaying what Betty said to me. Betty's major concern was that that craft was so close to them that they might have been contaminated. We had a neighbor who was a physicist, and my mother was waiting for him to return home from work so she could ask him what Betty and Barney should do. They had already taken long showers because they felt clammy and contaminated when they arrived home. They had left their suitcases outside. They had a picnic cooler. They left that outside. They did not dare to take their clothing into the house. Betty took the dress that she was wearing off, though, and when she saw that it was torn, she placed it in her closet, knowing that it needed to be repaired. Barney sent his clothing to the cleaners. And so this went on. Betty went to the Portsmouth Public Library and checked out a book, the first book she'd ever read on the topic, according to all the reports. And there was an address in that book for the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. She wrote a letter to them 5 days later. Well, actually, 5 days, 6 days from the time they arrived home. It was September 26, 1961. And in that letter, she described and actually sketched the erratic pattern that the craft traveled in. And she mentioned that Barney had walked into the field and through binoculars had observed figures on this craft that were dressed in black, shiny uniforms and frightened him terribly. In fact, she was looking for a qualified psychiatrist who used hypnosis who could work with Barney to help him to remember what he could not, because he had a mental block about what he had observed in terms of any of the details that of their features or anything else on the craft. He described to Walter Webb figures that uh, reminded him of military officers and the precision in which they moved, and also that one appeared to be wearing some kind of military cap on his head. However, I'm a long-time investigator. I was the Mutual UFO Network's director of field investigator training for 10 years. I was their director of and founder of the abduction research team, or it's now was the experiencer research team. It eventually became that title, and now it's the resource team. But anyway, I did that for 10 years as well. I've worked on 4 studies, major studies on experiencers, looking for what they have in common. And so I know quite a bit about experiencers, how they react to all of this, and so on and so forth. So Barney grew more and more distressed over time. Betty wanted answers. She's like me. I mean, when I was a kid, my favorite book was Nancy Drew, and my favorite television show was Perry Mason.
Oh, yeah.
So I was a girl detective, you might say, and I began to look into this. I was able to meet most of the investigators on their case, and when I became an adult, I became even more interested. I separated fact from fiction in the case, and spent years doing my own boots on the ground investigation, plus reviewing all of the archival records and going, for example, to the American Philosophical Society, the home of the skeptics and disinformants files, that sort of thing. But to get back to Betty and Barney, they wanted this to remain confidential. They were willing to talk to technical people, to scientists, military officers. In fact, there was a naval officer who was very supportive of them and was trying to help Barney especially to cope with what had happened. But Barney eventually succumbed to bleeding ulcers. He wasn't able to sleep. This was causing great distress for him. So he ended up being referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon, who was a renowned psychiatrist who had developed his unique form of deep trance hypnosis that was successful in treating veterans returning home from World War II who were suffering from shell shock and conversion hysteria. And so he was successful in treating Barney through deep trance hypnosis. Betty wanted to be hypnotized too. She was hypnotized. And Dr. Simon made sure that they could not share information by reinstating amnesia at the end of each session. So he saw them separately. One waited in a waiting room with bombastic music playing, while the other one was undergoing treatment. This went on for a period of 6 months, which included a couple of months of playing back their hypnosis tapes that he had recorded of them, so one could listen to what the other one had said and to work through any trauma that they had experienced, because under hypnosis, Betty had been quite distressed as well. So sort of in a nutshell, that's what happened. Stanton T. Friedman, nuclear physicist, And I wrote the book, captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. I updated it. Stanton, of course, passed away in 2019, but I updated it for the 60th anniversary because I've never stopped looking for evidence. And there were scientists who have done further analysis of Betty's dress, further analysis of the star map that Betty saw on the craft, with very interesting findings. So it's all in the book.
Barney never really wanted to come forward about any of this, did he?
Neither Betty nor Barney wanted to go forward. And I'll tell you why. They were known in the state of New Hampshire for their political activities. Barney was and Betty were involved in the NAACP, both locally and at the regional level. Barney was legal redress, Betty was secretary. They were active in the civil rights movement. They were also active in doing good things in their community. They had set up the Rockingham County Community Action Program with funding through the Federal Office of Economic Opportunity. And Barney was given an award from Sergeant Shriver because he was the chairman of this committee. Barney had been instrumental in setting up a literacy program in New Hampshire. And this was extraordinarily important for voters who were illiterate because they could not vote. In that time frame, there was a literacy test. So he received an award for that work. Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire and worked in child welfare and adoption. Barney spoke around the state regarding civil rights and equal rights, and Betty had a long history as an advocate for civil rights. In fact, way back when she was a sophomore in college, she was the chairperson of a group of students who had a committee through the church for interracial relations. So way back when Betty was young, she was an advocate for civil rights. If you want to go back further, my grandfather was a selectman in the town of Kingston, New Hampshire. He had been the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, which is comparable to the position of mayor. As such, although there was no formal police department in that time frame, my grandfather was a police officer, and he had taken Betty when she was a child to a Ku Klux Klan meeting because the Klan had infiltrated that area of New Hampshire. And as a police officer, he had infiltrated the Klan and was spying on their activities. And Betty remembered how my grandfather was holding her and said, "These are bad people." So she had this training in the very beginning. My grandparents were the welfare officers in the town of Kingston, so needy people went to them. My grandmother was a union organizer in that time frame as well. So very politically active family without an interest in UFOs or extraterrestrials. And this just happened. And they wanted to continue with their activities, their normal lives. But there was a violation of confidentiality in 1965 that carried their story to the public. And this was devastating to Betty and Barney.
At what point did you decide to pursue this work professionally rather than personally?
It was in 1991 when I joined the Mutual UFO Network and trained to become an investigator. I had met other investigators who had investigated Betty's case, like Robert Homan, C.D. Jackson, Walter Webb, Ben Simon, John Fuller, who wrote the first book about them. And met him, had let's say Jacques Vallée, many investigators who came. And I really admired their work and thought that I would like to do this at some point in my life. So I had a professional career, but I decided that I wanted to investigate my aunt and uncle's case. So I did that training with the Mutual UFO Network. It gave me the skills to begin my formal investigation. Of course, I'd heard about it for years and years. I'd been out with Betty. I'd interviewed Betty. She had been a mentor on UFOs since 1985 or so, just teaching me about the field and what was going on in the field, what was real, what was not real, that sort of thing. So it was 1991 when I began my formal investigation of her case. I began my boots on the ground investigation, and over time, also looking into the archives that she had collected, and then on to the physical archives in places like the American Philosophical Society down in Philadelphia, John Fuller's collection in Boston, Massachusetts, etc. So I was, when Betty died, let me qualify that. I didn't want to speak publicly about my findings until Betty was deceased. And when she died, I had been writing the book slowly over time, but that is when I asked Stanton Friedman if he would like to join me in authoring this book. And so we worked together on it. I had things that I wanted to say that I could not say when Betty was alive because I was doing an unbiased investigation, an unbiased study of their statements under hypnosis vis-a-vis dreams that Betty had had. I was skeptical about what had actually happened if there was a real abduction. I knew there was something had happened to them because of the damaged clothing, the spots on the trunk of the car, which I saw 2 days after they returned home, and much, much more. Barney's decline because of the stress that this had caused him. But so I was determined. My background was in sociology and social work and then education. And I was determined to get to the truth and the answers. And I did this over many years. Our book, Captured, was published in 2007. And then I went on to write 5 more books, 3 with Stanton Friedman, and continued to work, delve more deeply into this field and all aspects of it, even the parts that are considered taboo in the UFO world.
Description of the aliens, were they conventional grays or did they have a different appearance?
There were 2 types on the craft. One fit more the description of the conventional 3.5 to 4 foot tall grays. They act as the police force, you might say, and the assistants on the craft, but they also have a voice. They might even be the supervisors. And then there are the taller ones whose heads were more in proportion to their bodies than the smaller ones whose heads were very, very large in proportion to their bodies. They had barrel chests, spindly arms and legs, dressed in black shiny uniforms. They had a slit for a mouth. They were completely hairless. Their noses were fairly flat with just small upturned sort of flared nostrils, large eyes that wrapped around to the sides of their faces, There was an iris. They did not see these black eyes on the taller ones. They saw a dark iris and pupil. And then around that, they saw a little yellow where the white of our eyes would be. But the iris was so large that it took up most of that eye space. They didn't have eyebrows, they didn't have ears, and there was a question about how they spoke because Betty said that they had communicated with her verbally and in English, but Barney said that they communicated with him through thought. And so there was this discrepancy that Dr. Simon had to work out because Betty had dreamed that they had spoken to her in English. And so I'm also no longer, but I am a retired hypnotherapist and quantum healing hypnosis practitioner. I've also done scholarly studies on hypnosis. And so I know a great deal about it. And I know that some of Betty's dream material bled into those hypnosis sessions. That's something that I did not want to write about. And then therefore I didn't speak before Betty was deceased. But I do, in my comparative analysis, I discovered that this did occur, that perhaps Betty was letting dreams bleed into her material. Barney had told Dr. Simon what he had heard from Betty of Betty's dreams, and he had not heard all of Betty's dreams. But they were in agreement pretty much from their own perspective. They were examined in separate rooms on what had occurred. Now, in Betty's dreams, those non-humans looked pretty human. They had black hair. They were about 5.5 feet tall. They looked, they had normal human eyes, eyebrows, mouths with lips, ears. They were dressed in blue cadets uniforms and caps. Now, that's not what Betty and Barney remembered under hypnosis.
That's the first I've heard of that about the others.
Yeah.
That look more human than alien. We're going to take our first break here, and then we'll come back right after.
This is Dark Matter News. I'm Joshua Stark. A mysterious object reportedly crashed on public land just outside the boundary of Area 51 in Nevada. The incident is said to have happened in late September, and according to locals who monitor the area, the response was immediate and unusually intense. Witnesses reported hearing radio traffic referring to an asset going down, followed by military security vehicles and Clark County Sheriff's units blocking access roads. A helicopter with a lift basket was also observed near a staging area that included temporary equipment and personnel support, suggesting a planned recovery operation. Local observers who attempted to approach the area later found signs of a crash site, including burn marks beneath Joshua trees, disturbed soil, and tracks from heavy vehicles. Some debris was reportedly visible before being covered. Within days, the site was graded over with fresh dirt, indicating a second cleanup effort designed to hide or protect what had fallen. The official explanation provided by the military is that an unmanned aerial vehicle malfunctioned and crashed, and that an investigation is ongoing into possible tampering, including the presence of unrelated debris. However, those who have followed aircraft testing near Area 51 for years argue that the rapid lockdown and thorough concealment are not typical of routine UAV accidents. Some believe the object may have been part of a classified next-generation program, potentially involving autonomous control systems. Catch up with us at darkmatternews.com.
Where can the skills you learn with ham radio take you? Amateur radio, often called ham radio, is the place where today's engineers got their start. Ham radio is more popular than ever before. With hands-on training in electronics, engineering, and digital communications, modern hams interface computers and radios in entirely new ways. Ham radio in the 21st century can take you around the world or into a whole new career. Learn more. Go to arrl.org. Join us.
New research from sociologists in Canada show that the belief in the paranormal is far more common than many assume. In a national survey conducted this year, about 44% of Canadians said that they believe in at least one paranormal phenomenon, including ghosts, spirits, haunted places, alien visitation, or mysterious creatures like Sasquatch. About 1 in 4 Canadians say they've had what they interpret as a direct paranormal experience, such as sensing a presence or witnessing something they couldn't explain. The study also found differences among age groups and genders. Younger adults, especially those under 30, were less likely to believe in the paranormal, while older adults were more open to the possibility. This is Dark Matter News.
Welcome back to Midnight Frequency Radio with our guest, Kathleen Marden. What aspects of Betty and Barney's experience have held up the strongest under scientific or investigative scrutiny?
First of all, the pink powdery substance on Betty's dress, and of course the damage to Betty's dress, the tears in her dress that
I'm sorry.
Many scientists have looked at. Her dress has undergone chemical analysis by several credentialed scientists. The first was at the University of Cincinnati. Then we went on to another chemical analysis by another company, and then Phyllis Budinger, who is an analytical chemist. She had her master's degree in chemistry. She worked for BP Amoco, formerly Standard Oil, for 35 years, and was an analytical chemist of very, very good credentials. She did a very in-depth chemical evaluation of Betty's dress. Also, there was DNA analysis done on Betty's dress in different parts. One of them showed spider blood. Another in the area of her navel indicated, well, it looked like blood, but it indicated that it was Betty's DNA. Well, the person who did the DNA analysis, the scientist, said that it could possibly have been sweat from Betty's body, but there were no sweat stains elsewhere. And we thought that it was interesting that it was in the location of her navel where she remembered having a needle inserted during her examination. So there's a possibility. There's a relationship there. For you can accept it or you can dismiss it. But there were no sweat stains elsewhere. There was spider blood elsewhere, probably because it had been in the closet, or maybe because she sat at a picnic table during her trip. But that was part of it. All all the scientists have said it was anomalous. Their findings were anomalous, that uh, they could not prove that there was alien DNA on Betty's dress, but it was, they found things that were there that should not have been there. And the most extraordinary analysis, I believe, is the most recent one. It was done in a chemistry department at another university. Two professors who were tenured, over 30 years experience, and a student. They were looking for elements on Betty's dress, and they found 3 rare elements. And one of those rare elements is extraordinarily rare in the Earth's crust and very expensive. It has a very high melting point. And another one is not quite as rare, but extraordinarily rare in the Earth's crust. And as I was doing research on the findings from the report from the chemists, I discovered that those 2 are now being used in nanotechnology. And so it made me wonder if those deposits came when Betty's dress was dropped on the floor of this craft. And maybe the pink powdery substance was on Betty's dress because it hit the floor, and also from the entity's hands, because the parts of her dress that were very heavily saturated with that pink powdery substance were where either it touched the floor or these entities had touched Betty's dress. And so I found that to be extraordinarily interesting as well. And then we had the star map. Well, I was always extraordinarily skeptical about the star map. And that's the reason that I asked Stanton Friedman to join me, because he had found scientists to vet Marjorie Fish's work. He had vetted Marjorie initially and found that she was extraordinarily bright and that she, he said, was better at talking with scientists than with the general public. And this was a star map that Betty had dreamed about and then had described under hypnosis. In her dreams, this star map was like a school map in a classroom, paper map that you pull down over the chalkboard. But that was not what Betty remembered under hypnosis. Under hypnosis, she remembered asking the non-human where he was from. She said, "I know you're not from around here. Where's your home port?" And so he produced this star map by pulling something out of the wall. And then it sort of went up in front of her, almost like a screen that she was looking through. It was 3-dimensional. And there were stars of various sizes and colors on the map, ranging from the size of like nickels to just pinpoints. And he gave Betty information regarding the stars on that map, that some that were connected by 5 solid lines were trade routes, and 1 or 2 solid lines were also trade routes. And then there were others that were connected by broken lines, and they were just expeditions. So Dr. Simon gave Betty the post-hypnotic suggestion that she could go home and draw that map as long as she could remember it accurately, and it didn't trouble her too greatly. She did that. And then it was published in the first book that was ever written about their case. It wasn't an entirely accurate book. It was based primarily on the hypnosis sessions. But Betty's star map was in that book, and Marjorie Fish saw it, and she was skeptical. But she decided that since she was an amateur astronomer, she would go to the university and look at the astronomical catalog. She had to hand copy all of the characteristics of the nearby stars out 54 light years from our sun. And then she took them home. It was before computers, home computers. And so she was building three-dimensional models, constructing them out of frames and using silk thread on beads of various sizes and colors. She had to do all the mathematical calculations to know precisely where to put those on her three-dimensional models. And in all, she built 14 and still didn't have a match. Then in 1972, she went back to the university. And a new catalog had been published 2 or 3 years earlier that she wasn't aware of. And this new catalog had different distance data because we had made technological progress. And so she copied that new distance data, and she went back and began to rearrange the stars in the models that she had built out 54 light years from the sun in all directions. And finally, she had a match. And there were special characteristics about this match of hers. On Betty's map, all of the stars were sun-like, although only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood are sun-like stars. Also, they're all in a plane, which means that it would be easier for spacefaring astronauts to move from one star to the other. Stanton Friedman used to say, like pepperoni on a pizza, as opposed to raisins in a thick loaf of raisin bread. They'd move along a plane from one star system to another as they traveled through space, if they were in the early stages of travel. And one of the astronomers who vetted Marjorie's work made the comment that if we had developed the ability to travel through space, this is precisely the route that we would have taken from Zeta Reticuli up to our star system. And so that was quite extraordinary as well. And it convinced many scientists that her work was accurate. And all of the scientists that Stanton asked to vet her work stated that it was accurate. Of course, there were skeptics who came forward and said it was all nonsense, that you could throw marbles into a sand pile and you could find a match. But it would not be the kind of match that Marjorie found. There were these special characteristics that I spoke about. And so, they were the typical disinformants and deniers who would deny anything regarding UFO abduction or ET contact, even close encounters with UFOs. So I would sort of expect that of them anyway. I think that most people know who they were and who they are today. So that was very, very interesting. And then many years later, a student contacted Stanton. And in 2013, she had done another analysis of the star map. But now this astrophysics student had many, many more models and a computer. So this was over 2,200 and some odd models of our local galactic neighborhood. And she was highly skeptical too. She didn't think she was going to find a match, and she thought that Marjorie's work was not going to hold up. But in the end, she stated that she was amazed that of all the models that she looked at, Marjorie's was the closest match. And there might have been two stars that were a better match for the two of the stars that Marjorie had identified. But this just added support to the idea that Marjorie's work was accurate. And I've heard and that Marjorie had apologized to Carl Sagan and said that she was wrong. I remember it wasn't to Carl Sagan, as far as Stanton and I knew. Marjorie had never told Betty this. She'd never told any researcher this, but this is what the disinformants say. But anyway, Carl Sagan and others were saying that Zeta Reticuli could not be the home base because they're a binary star system, and there could not be a stable orbit among planets in a binary star system. Well, that's what scientists thought in that time frame, but they no longer think that. The Zeta Reticuli is 1 and 2 are far enough apart that they could have planets in a stable orbit. We know that today.
How many UFO investigations have you done on other people's sightings or abductions?
No, I'm not a person who counts. I've done many, I can say that. I've worked with about 5,000 experiencers through my team on the studies that I have done. As a hypnotherapist, I worked with many, and I would not do hypnosis on anyone whose case I had not investigated because I didn't want to risk giving anyone false memories. And so into the thousands, maybe 1,000 or more, I would say. I did many of those, not for the Mutual UFO Network, but privately, because, initially I started as a nuts and bolts investigator, but then I realized that that's only a small part of ET contact, of people who have had these experiences, that there is phenomena that surround and there is overlay on all of this. And those studies that I worked on confirmed that. And so I really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of all of this. And so I had to do investigations that MUFON did not approve of, because I thought, my motto is, if you don't seek, you will never find. And I didn't care about being acceptable in terms of perceptions of the UFO community. I was willing to move beyond the traditional and go into the taboo, into the unorthodox side of the studies, because I wanted myself to have a complete overview, insight into all of this, because there is a paranormal overlay. Experiencers undergo a transformative process where they might become healers, or they might be healed, where they receive information, where they might have a relationship with these non-humans who give them information and communicate with them. The majority of experiencers, I found, well over 50% were intergenerational. Over 50% had observed what appeared to be conscious orbs in their homes. Not outside looking into the sky. These were inside their homes. And sometimes they expanded into non-humans, and sometimes they simply communicated with them. And in one of my cases, it's quite extraordinary. There was a man I'd been working with for several years, because when I did an investigation, it wasn't like on a treadmill where you just do one after another. I would stay with a person for years as they collected evidence and as they had more experiences, because most people are taken more than one time. So in this extraordinary case, the witness ended up developing cancer. And I just said to him, he was afraid he was going to die. I said to him, you can ask for healing. And so I taught him how to meditate and, just relax and send telepathic messages to his ETs and ask for healing. And he did that. And within a couple of weeks, he was able to take his phone when he felt a presence in his bedroom at night as he was lying in bed. And he was able to video record an orb that came into his bedroom and slid down his wall and then flew almost like a butterfly. It was morphing as it crossed the room. It dove down into his body. He slept for about 12 hours after this occurred. He sort of lost consciousness and slept. And then when he awoke in the morning, the very large nodes that were on the side of his head had completely disappeared. By the time he went in for surgery and had surgery, they removed tiny necrotic nodes. They were no longer cancerous. They were dying. And this was very extraordinary. There was a medical consultant involved in this who collected all of his medical reports. I have one of his medical reports, but we wanted a medical doctor involved in this as well. And so this was the first healing on video by a conscious orb. It was beautiful. It was baby blue, and it had kind of an ecru-colored center. And as it was about to enter his body, maybe it was the flight that I could see, but it almost looked like it was putting down little iridescent tendrils, and it dove down very quickly. And he was healed.
On the orb subject, I had Peter Davenport on a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about a carload of friends that were traveling, and the orbs came down and hovered around the vehicle, and then they passed through the glass of the vehicle, and one of the occupants of the vehicle had surgery on his stomach, and the orbs kind of went to him and hovered around his surgical area, and then left and disappeared. So,
did anything happen? Did it heal faster or anything? Or
well, I asked Mr. Davenport, and he said he didn't have any further information after their encounter.
Okay.
So, but have you worked with Mr. Davenport?
Yes, I know him. He's originally from New Hampshire, like I am. I know.
He's covered
Peter.
some interesting topics and coverage of the contacts. We're going to take our second break, and we'll be right back after that.
This is Dark Matter News. I'm Joshua Stark. A large international study suggests that speaking more than one language might help slow down the aging process. Researchers examined data from over 86,000 Europeans aged 51 to 90 and found that individuals who were monolingual had roughly double the risk of showing signs of accelerated biological aging compared to those who spoke multiple languages. Conversely, speaking 2, 3, or more languages was linked with a healthier aging profile. Experts believe that the benefit comes from the cognitive challenge of managing and switching between languages, which may keep the brain sharper and more resilient. The study included controls for age, physical health, environment, and social factors, yet the multilingual advantage remained significant. Importantly, the findings don't imply that you must become perfectly fluent in multiple languages to see benefit. Even so, multilingual exposure appears helpful. The authors say that this research has public health implications in aging societies, encouraging language learning and maintaining multilingual environments could be a cost-effective strategy to improve cognitive health and delay decline. In short, learning languages isn't just a cultural bonus, it may be a practical tool in the fight against the ravages of aging. Dark Matter News is social. Are you? Catch up with us on Facebook, X, and where you find your favorite social network. Also, darkmatternews.com. That's it for Dark Matter News. Catch up with us on the Midnight Frequency Facebook page. From Memphis, Tennessee, I'm Joshua Stark.
Hi, this is Jessica with C. Crane. Tired of spotty radio reception and static? C. Crane CC Wi-Fi 3 Internet Radio offers a crystal clear solution with audio guaranteed to outperform any smartphone speaker. With an internet connection, tune in to over 30,000 radio stations from around the world, all conveniently accessible without needing any apps, providing personal information, or additional monthly subscriptions. Enjoy complete privacy with no microphone or eavesdropping. The CC Wi-Fi 3 boasts a user-friendly interface with a full-sized remote for easy control. It also doubles as a Bluetooth speaker for your favorite music and podcasts. Ready to upgrade your listening experience? You can get the CC Wi-Fi 3 by calling C. Crane at 800-522-8863 or by visiting us online at ccrane.com. Once again, that's ccrane.com.
Welcome back to Midnight Frequency Radio with our guest, Kathleen Marden. When you're investigating a report, how do you determine if it's legit or they're just trying to pull the wool over your eyes?
Well, I decided a long time ago that I was going to have a policy that everyone had to remain confidential, that I was never going to publicize their case. And so I would have conversations with people on a confidential basis. And, you know, it was just a conversation back and forth. They'd tell me what had occurred. And then I would interrupt periodically. I'd tell them that I wanted to do that. If I had a question, or I might hold my questions until the end, depending upon how it was going, and if I had something I needed to address immediately. And then I wanted to know if they had any evidence. And if they didn't have evidence, then all they needed was basically support if they were having difficulty having had this experience. And most people initially do experience trauma. It's not like a great experience initially. They become accustomed to it over time. But I definitely did not want to pass judgment on them. I didn't want to give a case disposition. If I realized that there was mental illness, it was just it quietly went away, and they could get in touch with me periodically. If they didn't have any evidence, then I even wrote a book, Extraterrestrial Contact: What to Do When You've Been Abducted, which teaches people how to discover if their experiences are real. Because I think it's the individual has to collect their evidence, because I can't always get there to collect evidence, and no field investigator could get there to collect evidence immediately. And so much of it just fades away or is discarded. So I started to collect photographs of evidence that they found on their bodies. And also, I had the idea that if they were taken in clothing, that they could place that clothing into a paper bag and put it into a warm, dark room for, say, a month, and then pull it out to see what they see on it. We developed protocols on how, for the whole team, on how to investigate a UFO abduction, and what to look for, what very simple tools experiencers can purchase, like a magnetometer, like a black light or a UV light, so that when they were taken, they could go into a dark room and look at their bodies for any unusual markings. And generally, they would end up being geometric pattern shapes. Now, everyone needs to know that a certain yeast fluoresces under a black light. I was using a dermatologist's level black light, UV light, and that a dermatologist would use on the genital area looking for yeast. So I'd let people know that, and if you find something, it's not necessarily anomalous. There could be a conventional explanation, such as any lotions or oils on their bodies. They would fluoresce as well. So that was part of it. It's more teaching people how to look for the evidence and to stay in touch with me. I developed a whole catalog of patterned marks, wounds that people found on their bodies, puncture wounds or burns or that kind of thing, that I and my team kept cataloged. People started to, some, not many, photograph non-human entities and portals that they came through. And I have not released most of that either. But people have been wonderful in working with me. I'm retired now. I'm no longer doing it. But for many, many years, I worked together with experiencers, and they knew that they were not going to receive any publicity. I did mention a few in a book if they had a great deal of evidence, and which they owned. I had to get permission to use it. I believe that they should own their evidence. If they have an implant removed, they have to give permission for it to be analyzed by a laboratory if we can find one to analyze it. So I believe in experiencer rights. I'm not a person who is going to treat an experiencer without respect, thinking that they're just hoaxing. I treat them with respect and consideration and confidentiality, and we work together. I used to find vetted hypnotherapists or psychotherapists who worked with experiencers. These are people who held licenses or certificates, were in private practice, had insurance, and that individual could make the decision to go to them for therapy, and they didn't have to give me anything back. This was for them. So I mean, I think I took that route because of the ridicule, of the harassment, of the harm that I saw being done to experiencers, where these supposed blue ribbon panels were supposedly objective. And they would take someone and, although Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum, for example, were not taken to craft, they had an incredible encounter which left them with serious burns, radiation burns on their bodies. And there was a blue ribbon panel set up. And John Schuessler, who was a NASA scientist, who I have a great deal of respect for, he was at one time the executive director of the Mutual UFO Network. And John had done a very good, objective, unbiased investigation. But then the debunkers set up a blue ribbon panel, and they were going to, they claimed that they were the unbiased ones and the UFO investigators were biased. So they thought of themselves as being the objective ones, even though they had a very dismissive attitude. And, they ended up, in my estimation, not only harming the researchers through their attacks, harming Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum, slandering the women, saying that they probably laid templates down on their skin and intentionally burned themselves.
Oh my goodness.
And that was in the report. I could not stomach that kind of investigation where I saw people being harmed and I refused to participate in it.
I would too.
And that's why I worked with people confidentially and with many, many experiencers over many years.
Across all of your investigational encounters, were there any consistent patterns that stood out?
Absolutely. Our studies indicated that as well. I have statistics, in fact, where most had experienced some kind of health problem related to contact. 53% of 516 who were in our MUFON ERT study that we did with Dr. Don C. Donderi, who from McGill University, who took part in phase 2 of the study by administering a psychological measure that would determine whether they had UFO abduction syndrome, whether they were members of the general public who were hoaxing, or were wannabes who knew a lot about the topic, but did not have the signature of being real UFO abductees. So it was a very well-rounded investigation that we did over a 3-year period. What we discovered is that 49% reported that they had not migraine headaches. 45% experienced nosebleeds after an abduction. 44% had chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome, of a medical diagnosis, whereas at that time it was less than 1% in the general population. In the first study I'd worked on, it was 34%. So, but it was a smaller study. This time, with many more participants, it was 44%. We had different groups that Dr. Donderi was able to identify for us. So we had our experiencer group, And overall, everyone who took part in the study, and also the abductee group, those who had UFO abduction syndrome and were closest to the target on this three-dimensional scale, statistical scale. And 45% of those who had UFO abduction syndrome had been healed. It was 10% with the overall experiencer group, self-identified. But many of those, I say self-identified, but many of those had been referred by our team members who believed that they had had a real abduction or experience. Paranormal events, 61% of the experiencers, 50% of the abductees. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to ask, do the experiencers from different cultures describe similar phenomenon, or are there major differences?
Similar phenomena in terms of what happens when they're taken to craft, and also marks on their bodies are the same around the world. Sometimes we see certain variations in those, but it's happening around the world. In some places, there's a higher frequency of a certain type of entity. We were able to identify, based on the participants' input, that they're seeing grays, two different types of grays. They're seeing the human types next on the scale that we think of as Nordics. They're seeing next the insectoid types that we think of as mantis types. I have many photographs of those. They're quite extraordinary to look at, and they're kind of funny because they try to disguise themselves in very strange ways, such as covering themselves with Christmas lights when they come through a portal in the wintertime. Or there are other ways too, but you can see their faces. You can see who it really is before they exit that portal. You can see them in the portal. So, and also after that, the basic is the reptilian type. So we have the basic types, and then we have many, many variations on those types, different colors, different sizes, and different experiencer reactions to them. Some people are having positive experiences. And in fact, even though most are traumatized in the beginning, over 70% said that they would not want their experiences to stop. So, that was kind of a surprise to us.
It would be to me.
Yeah. And I was surprised that some people encountered friendly reptilians. Even one had been healed by a reptilian. And our scientist was able to do a study on the source of the sample from that experiencer's body. And the closest match to that was the reptile on this planet who has DNA that is the closest to human DNA. So, what's that all about?
Yeah.
I was really shocked by that. Also, 69% of the experiencer group said that they had become more spiritual as a result of their experiences. And among the abductee group, those with UFO abduction syndrome, 86% said that they had become more spiritual, which was amazing. Something that I wanted to test, that the team wanted to test, was conscious recall. You hear the deniers say that, well, it's all sleep paralysis or hypnagogic or hypnopompic dreams, hallucinations. And so we wanted to test that. And we asked the question, have you been, do you consciously recall? And, the first one was just, have you had this experience where you felt that non-humans had come in to your environment and you were paralyzed and were able to move on only your eyes? And so the majority said yes. But then we added the qualifier to the next question, asking if they had been wide awake, if they had conscious recall of observing non-humans enter their environment, and if then they had become paralyzed, but were not initially paralyzed because they remembered all of this observation. And among the abductee group, a significant percentage, I can't remember precisely what it was at this point, but a significant percentage stated that, yes, they were wide awake, that these entities entered their environment. And it wasn't until after they came into the environment that they were paralyzed.
Over the last decade, did you notice any shifts in the nature of encounters?
I absolutely did. People are taken to craft less frequently. The modus operandi now is if they have to do anything that they can do physically in a person's home, they will simply, through portals, go to that location and do what they need to do. Also, for the advanced experiencers who have had a relationship with these non-humans over a lifetime, these non-humans will come into their environment and communicate with them. They don't see them necessarily. They might see an orb, or they might simply see a shimmering or maybe a shadow, or maybe nothing, but they will feel a tingling sensation. It's kind of an electrical tingling throughout their bodies, and they will hear high-pitched tones in their heads. And then if they relax, they can receive a message and they can communicate with these non-humans. And one of the things the non-humans are communicating is they're telling experiencers that the reason that they are working with us, the reason they're doing what they're doing, is that we are out of balance as a species, that our spiritual development and our technological progress are out of balance. And when this happens, where the technological progress has advanced faster than the spiritual development, it could lead, the word is, to the disintegration of the species. And so they are here to raise spirituality, to attempt to increase the spiritual nature of humans in order to strike a balance so that we won't destroy our planet and everything on it. They're also concerned, as they have been, dating way back into the 50s, about our use of nuclear weapons. And I think that, you look at Robert Salas, you look at all of the other military men on nuclear bases in the United States, and George Knapp's testimony before Congress about what happened in Russia with UFOs coming in over nuclear bases and activating and then turning off nuclear weapons. They've been giving that message for a very long, long time.
Yeah, there's been a lot of encounters with that.
Yes. And they're also concerned about toxins in the human body, the level of toxicity because of our sick environments and because of, especially in the United States, the terrible foods that we eat that are filled with chemicals or that are food products rather than being real foods.
Yeah, stay away from the processed stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you respond to scientific skeptics? Do you avoid them or argue
Oh,
with
it
them? Or,
depends on what kind of skeptic they are. I mean, I approach anything from a skeptical point of view. I don't let it show, but that's what I do in order to be able to analyze what is occurring, not only the person, but the data. If it is an open-minded skeptic, then that is fine. But if it is a closed-minded skeptic whose purpose is to destroy my reputation and any of my work, or my aunt and uncle's case, and there's a whole lot of that going on, I'm not interested in talking to them. I know what they're up to. I'm not going to interact with a nasty person. But I've talked to many scientists who are open-minded.
you spoke a minute ago about Mr. Knapp's testimony before Congress.
Yes.
What's your perspective of the current government disclosure efforts?
Well, I think that Congress has made a very good effort to interview former military officers and even George Knapp most recently under oath. The military has had a hissy fit. They did not want further funding for the office through Defense Intelligence Agency. I've, taking an analytical view, looked at this from all the way back when they had OSAP to ATIP, and then on through the years as it was becoming more and more amorphous. I knew what the military was doing. They didn't want to face or have us think that there was physical evidence of this, such as the men have spoken about, UFO crashes, the recovery of non-human biologics, that kind of thing. Dr. Gary Nolan's work on the brains of people who were in the military, who had burns and injuries as a result of their close contact with craft. The military wants to dismiss all of that. They've even found an explanation for the Tic Tac, which is a bogus explanation. So they didn't want further funding, and they didn't receive further funding for 2026. I hope that Congress will continue that because of the withdrawal of funding, they're not going to end their congressional hearings. I'm afraid that they might, but a lot was achieved. Now, last night, I watched the new movie that was just released, and it's on Amazon Prime. The price was $19.99 to watch it, $24.95 if you wanted to purchase it. And it's called The Age of Disclosure, and it was a hard-hitting movie. They had more than 20 military witnesses, people who had been military officers, talking about their experiences and their knowledge. And it was just one after another. And that's why I said it's hard hitting. And they get into the military intelligence agencies' threats against witnesses, and even how Lou Elizondo, there was a discussion about whether or not Lou Elizondo and David Grush were going to be assassinated. They were under that kind of threat from our own military, for whom they worked honorably. which was, I knew this, but to see it there after, it's kind of a pounding you get, even for people who have been in the field as long as I have, of one officer after another giving eyewitness testimony. People who had high-level positions in the government. Jim Semivan from the CIA was there and giving testimony. And I say it was an excellent movie, but hold on to your seats.
I'll have to check that one out. What kind of disclosures do you think would actually matter to experiencers?
I think that experiencers just want some validation overall, some acknowledgement. I don't want to scare the general public. Most of us don't want to frighten the public. We understand that. But stop stalking experiencers. Stop threatening experiencers. Stop interfering with their technology. For I was receiving a lot of complaints about this. So I did just a small informal study on, it was on about 20 people who were actually speaking publicly, either experiencers themselves or people who are working in the field as in the field of UFO abduction or ET contact. And 19 of 20 said they had been threatened. That's not acceptable.
No, it's not.
The part where, you try to destroy a person, you assassinate their character, you get involved in their employment and try to see that they will never work in their profession again. That's a terrible thing.
Yeah, it's sad, really.
And people who are having this happen need to become more militant, need to make reports to the police when they're threatened. That's what I'm telling people to do. Document it. If you have evidence, if you can supply evidence, make reports to the police. I had a nut who was calling me and threatening my life, and I reported it to my local police officer. He came to the house. He was very nice and respectful. In fact, when he was in the military, he had his own UFO sighting at a base. And he gave me a code that I was to punch into my telephone when this individual called me again, because he was harassing me during the day and at night with these threats. And so I was all ready. The police department was going to identify him and Baker Act him for a psychiatric evaluation. And so I was all ready. He called again, and I'm not really fast about punching in numbers. So I was looking at the number they gave me, and I hesitated. And the person, the bully, said to me, why are you hesitating? And I just told the truth. I said, well, I had a police officer over. I've lodged a formal police complaint against you. And I have a number that I'm trying to punch in so that the police department can trace you and listen to what you say to me so that they can Baker Act you. And he hung up and he never called back. That's what we need to do.
Oh, yeah. I know Art had his number of calls similar to that, and harassment. It's just really sad people have to take that, form of threats and stuff.
Yeah, and there are bullies. There are bullies running in organized groups who work together. There are people who make phone calls like this, and we need to become more militant and protect ourselves and report this to the authorities.
Are there any cases that you investigated that have shaken your own beliefs?
Oh, Oh, I had a case. I've had several, actually. One was a case in Texas. Um, it had been investigated by the Mutual UFO Network. I didn't know that at the time. Um, it had been investigated by paranormal groups, but they would do an investigation and then they just left this man who was experiencing great difficulty hanging. And he had watched me. I was on a television show. I've been on 65 of them. And so he contacted me and wanted to speak with me. So I spoke with him and he gave me a tremendous amount of evidence and information. But he had been a commercial airline pilot who had gone into business. He'd retired from that and he was running his own little airplane repair business, fancy little airplanes at an airport that he was renting. He was living on site with his wife. And one night there were people out on the runway, and he was afraid it was teenagers who were out there drinking and causing destruction. So he went out, and it wasn't teenagers at all. It was adults who were looking up at lights in the sky. And he said he'd never seen anything so intense in his life. There were two of them. And this sort of spurred his interest in investigating more because he knew nothing about UFOs. And he ended up wanting to contact them. He thought erroneously that he was going to be able to contact them and sit down at a table and have a conversation, sort of a meeting with them. And so he started pointing lasers at them when they would come in. And they started to come in more and more frequently. He set up cameras all over the airport so that the cameras would photograph them. And he captured a lot of good video and stills and hundreds of pictures that were not good.
Yeah,
I only want to see the good ones,
I understand that.
the best ones, the ones that are clear. And so one night he was talking with his sister on the phone, got up in the middle of the night. She was working overseas. And after their telephone conversation, he just happened to glance out the window in his door into the hangar. And he saw in that hangar a figure that he described as being brown and non-human. And then there were three little white entities who were dressed in silver uniforms with what he said looked like roper boots. And they moved as if they were connected, like the gate of a fence swings. That's how they moved together. And he fled up to his bedroom and very quickly fell asleep. Well, I suspect that they went into his abode that night and took him to craft. More and more things began to happen. His wife left him. She couldn't take it any longer. And he was there alone. The people who worked for him became aware of what was going on. One night, he woke up dressed only in his jockey shorts, barefoot, about a mile and a half away from his residence, had to walk back. In that he ended up fashioning handcuffs for himself. He put boards over his windows, not knowing that they could pass through solid surfaces. The handcuffs helped a little bit, but then he'd find that he'd wake up without them on. Finally, he was sleeping with an automatic weapon under his pillow. And one night he was awake. One entered his bedroom and he shot it.
Boy.
And it exploded. in a flash of blue light, but it left some kind of gooey substance on the floor. Now, this happened years before he contacted me, and he had not collected that. If I'd been working with him at that time, I would have told him to collect it, and I would have sent it to a laboratory
Yeah.
that we worked with through MUFON. But he didn't. And eventually, he became extraordinarily angry. He was out to kill them. I don't know if it was that attitude or what, but there was negative involvement. There were negative entities. One day he was sitting in his office doing some paperwork. Didn't have his shirt on, and something came in and raped down his chest, causing bleeding. And it took a whole month for that to heal up. There were negative entities coming in to his place. He had cameras set up. I mean, it was so bad that I believe that he developed an attachment, because every time he tried to leave and just run away from that business and just give everything up, he ended up in the hospital.
Mm.
He finally was able to escape. But eventually, I realized that there was some kind of negative attachment there. I had contacted a qualified individual who could remove attachments, and we went into prayer to try to help him from a distance. And he ended up being taken by ambulance to the hospital and died a couple of days later.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that really shook me pretty badly.
He didn't
That
he didn't experience any reptilians in his encounters, did he?
Well, that Bark Brown one might have been a reptilian.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as my level of knowledge goes, which is pretty good with all of the experiencers that I've worked with, when we're talking Bark Brown, it sounds like, and large,
Uh-huh.
standing against the wall, it sounds like a reptilian.
Yeah. They seem to have the worst reputation from my experiences and in interviews and stuff.
Yes, yeah, from my experience as well. Even though some of them are kind and nice, the smaller ones.
Yeah.
So there are different types of reptilians too.
Has your work changed the way you think about humanity's place in the universe?
Absolutely. I don't think that you can do this without having a change of focus. That, to know we're not the greatest, we're not the best, we have not reached the highest point in our development. There are those who are more highly developed than we are. That there is far more in terms of what we can see, and this expands beyond nuts and bolts investigations. That's only the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, there is so much more about our place. We begin to view ourselves as earthlings instead of little nationalists who belong to a certain country. This is a worldwide phenomenon, and we're just part of this earth.
Yeah.
So that's the way I view it.
What would you like listeners, skeptical or believers, to take away from your decades of research?
If they are interested, I would like for them to read my books, which are unbiased and open-minded. But my latest is really my own personal experiences. The Forbidden Knowledge is on my life and personal experiences. You take it with a grain of salt, do whatever you want with it. I don't care what you think. But if they want more information, read my books. They're written for the general public, but they go in depth into what these phenomena are all about. And then they have evolved over time according to my depth of knowledge. Also, watch the congressional hearings if you haven't. Watch that new movie, The Age of Disclosure, and educate yourself on what is occurring. And, if you're too frightened, you don't want to do that, don't come out with false information debunking all of it, because you're not debunking it. You're providing false narratives.
Yeah.
And that's simply not ethical.
Do you have any books or ongoing research projects you're most excited about right now?
What I'm excited about right now is I'm in the process of redoing my website, and it's focusing more on the evidence on the Hill case, including the archival records that I've posted, the original documents. So there's no excuse for being ignorant about what happened to Betty and Barney, and talking about a distant light in the sky and mental illness and all of the things that people talk about. Also, I'm working on my archival collection as I'm aging, and I'm really excited that my work is going to be preserved in an archive and go down in history, so that people in the future will be able to read it as well. And I'm very slowly writing a book about my aunt. And whenever I have time, I don't have a lot of time because of I have to read every single page of every document in all of my files in order to vet them, because I'm not going to reveal any identities. A lot of my work has been confidential, or at least I could tell the story, but not identify any information about who the individual was. So I have to go through all of that. They've been sitting in locked files for many, many years, and I've been adding to it. That's a lot of work.
I'm sure it is, and hours of reading.
Yes,
Would you
absolutely.
like to give your website to our listeners?
Absolutely. My website is Kathleen-Marden.com. You can see it right there on the screen, how my name is spelled.
And I also put a link to your website and your book page on my site. So
Thank you so much.
listeners can go there also and get to the same location.
It was a pleasure to speak with you today.
I've enjoyed it, and you're a fountain of information, and
Thank you.
you've dealt with a lot of experiences. And
I have over time.
yes, ma'am. Are there any last thoughts you'd like to give our listeners?
I think I've already said, just keep an open mind, have respect for people who are experiencers. People are out there all the time now on social media claiming they're experiencers without an investigation or anything. Just don't treat them with disrespect, or say, I have the answer for you, go see a psychiatrist and have your head examined, and the psychiatrist will give you your diagnosis. I've read that on social media, and it's extraordinarily disrespectful. And I think that we have to treat other humans with compassion, even if they're so confused or disturbed or attention seeking that they're posting their own information or making it up. Just ignore them.
Yeah, there's too many experiencers out there to try to debunk everything.
Yes.
It's just
Yeah. And always look for references. Look for in books that have a bibliography, that have footnotes, because that is extraordinarily important. It shows that what you're reading is credible.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I sure appreciate you being on my show, and I'm honored to have you.
Oh, thank you
It's
so
been a
much.
pleasure. So
For me too.
I will let you get on with your day, and
All right.
this interview would go on this evening at 9 p.m. Central. So
Great. Thank you
after
so much.
after I edit my long pauses between questions. I'm not as good as Art was, but I'm, trying and try to bring this
Well,
information to listeners and, let them make their decisions.
yes. And practice makes perfect.
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
the more you do it, the more comfortable you become.
Yeah, my first interviews were horrifying. So
And Art was a master.
he was indeed. I sure miss him.
Hmm. I think we all do.
Well, I will let you go. And once again, I appreciate it. And you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Have a good show. Bye bye.
Bye bye.